Hello dear students, a good day to all of you. We are in the prelims marathon sessions, and this is the prelims marathon session for the subject of environment. So before I go into the session, I would like to give you a brief outline of what we'll be covering in these sessions so that you have your expectations managed and you can also plan your revision according to it. See, primarily the marathon sessions are like a crash course sort of a thing where you get a quick insight into what that subject's most important areas are, what are the most important concepts related to it, etc. So this is exactly what we'll be doing in environment also. For environment, how I have planned these sessions is primarily and very specifically, as you know, for the coming prelims which is there. For the coming prelims of 2024, what all do you need to know for environment in an important manner? That is what is going to get covered in these sessions. So I have planned it into majorly 3 parts, I would say. The first part deals with, and that is going to be the part that I'm going to discuss today or right now. That part is going to have static environment. Static environment is primarily those who are very new to the subject, those who have not sat for any environment classes or anything will find this part very useful. Why? Because I'm going to introduce you to the terms, the smaller terms, the environment, biosphere, habitat, home range, territory, these kind of terms, these kind of concepts that are important to you in the learning of this subject. So if you have absolutely no idea what environment is, this part is going to be very helpful for you. For those who've attended a session of environment and any classes of environment previously, I would say if you want to watch these sessions, use it like a revision sort of a thing where you sit with your notes. If you've made notes in your class where you've sat for it, sit with those notes as we go by these topics, because it's more or less going to be in a very similar order itself. So as we go by these topics, you can just look through your notes again, add any points, and then revise your notes again rather than revising the video. Whatever situation you are in, if you have not completed environment or if you've not started environment, whatever is your situation in, I would always suggest that when you watch these kind of videos, to have a sort of quick note along with it so that you don't have to repeatedly go and watch the video. If you watch the video, it's good for me because, the views increase, but that's not the point. The point is you should be benefited by it, and you will be benefited by it only when you compress this video into a note and you keep revising the note which is there. So the first part is purely static. The second part deals with a nightmarish sort of part of environment which is there, which is your international organizations of environment. That is going to be a second part. And a third part of the video will be purely current affairs. The reason last year, this is not how we did it. Last year, I had put the current affairs along with the static areas and we discussed it together. But I figured out it makes more sense if you are planning your revision in a way where if you want to just revise, you're done with your entire static environment, you just want to revise your current affairs environment, then it makes more sense for those guys to just watch that particular video rather than sitting and watching all the hours of static and international organizations, etc. Okay, so this is the reason why, considering your reviews and your opinions, is where I have changed the pattern. I have gone about with the static, international organizations and current affairs part. Those all who feel this is their difficult area can choose and watch these videos. If you want to watch the entire thing, well and good. So with that, let's get into the subject. I'm stressing on the point. So this is not going to be like a foundation class where each and everything, is discussed in much detail. I'm going to give you the quick things that you need to keep in your mind to solve questions. Got it. Because when there's 30 days for prelims, I don't think you can build concepts from ground to top, the entire subject right now. So whatever you need to use as a quick thing to get your answers is what we are going to do in these sessions. So without much delay, let's get into the subject. The first thing, as any environment class begins, we need to understand what exactly environment is. And to understand what environment is, the best thing is to stop for a moment and think for yourself, what exactly is the environment you are in right now? Okay, so whenever I use the word environment, I want you to quickly correlate it to the idea that environment is primarily your surroundings. Now, you are there right now. So you are sitting maybe in a room and watching this. So in your environment, you have your laptop, your mobile screen, your air around you. Maybe you're eating food. So then food is there around you. Now my point is, if I remove you from there, if I am like, can you please come outside? And I remove you from there, those environment still remains there. Which means what? The environment need not be defined with respect to a particular creature. The environment can be surroundings. When you move from there and come out, you are in a different environment. That environment which you were previously there still remains there as it is. Got it. So I want you to keep this point in mind. Environment is the component in which you have different factors acting together. What are these factors? You have biotic factors and you have abiotic factors. Biotic primarily means living factors and abiotic is non-living factors. What exactly is living factors? Living factors would mean any of your organisms that are there. The bacteria, the fungi, the protozoa, the other human beings, the animals, plants, all of these are your biotic components. And then abiotic would be your light, air, water, all of these other components. Now my point is, you can say it is an environment when in that particular thing, you have abiotic and biotic factors interacting with each other. When they interact with each other, what do you mean by interact with each other? For example, you have a plant, maybe you're sitting in your study room, you have a plant over there, the plant is in that surroundings, the plant is taking in carbon dioxide or giving out oxygen, what are they doing, photosynthesis, so all of those things are there, there is an air transfer happening, right? So this is what you can call as an interaction. So here, environment is the natural component in which biotic and abiotic factors interact among themselves and with each other. It has physical, biological and chemical interactions. Got it? If this is environment, the next term I want you to get introduced with is something called as biosphere. See, first understand these terms individually and then I'll tell you the pointer which you can use to, differentiate between each. See, in environment, I told you, what is there? Biotic factors and abiotic factors, right? So, in an environment, you have both living and non-living. Okay. Now, if you just have living things, or if it is just comprising of the biological components of the environment, that area together is called as biosphere. So let's understand that again. When I'm saying biosphere, bio contributes to living. I told you environment has living and non-living. So there you cannot distinguish. But if I had to give a name for the cumulative area, it's not in one place. I cannot be like, okay, this is biosphere. No, I cannot say that. Where you are right now, when you get out onto the road, biosphere is there. Why? Because you have animals, you have humans, everything existing over there. So as part of every part of the earth, as part of your land, as part of your water, as part of your air, as part of every component, you have life that is there. Now, if I had to give a term for all the life that exists on the earth, or all the living component, the biological component of the earth all put together, this is called as biosphere. So for you, the first differentiating factor is whenever you see the word biosphere, it doesn't have anything. So you must be thinking, how is the biological part living over there without the abiotic factor? No, you cannot live without the abiotic factors. But here, what are we talking about? We're just talking about the term to represent all the biological parts, all the biological components of the earth. So if the biological component is there in hydrosphere, that is part of the biosphere. What is part of the biosphere? Whichever is the biological component in there, that is part of the biosphere. If you have some organisms in the air, in the atmosphere, that is part of the biosphere. If you have plants and grass and everything on the lithosphere, that is part of the biosphere. So biosphere is the biological component of the earth, which includes lithosphere, hydrosphere and atmosphere. Now this is where I want you guys to have a little bit more clarity. Okay, so normally what happens is when we say life and when we say living, the first thing that comes to our mind is like, full organism, which is like breathing and eating and everything. Now, this is where I want you to have a little bit more scientific understanding of what life actually means. Life is something, though philosophically you can call it in different ways, scientifically, life or the processes of life are dependent on a compound called as carbon. Carbon and its different forms. Okay, so for example, if I'm saying you have life within you, scientifically it means that you have carbon compounds which are reacting with each other, forming newer compounds that is helping, for example, the food you eat. You have different compounds in it. You are converting the carbohydrates, you're converting the starch, everything gets converted into an energy form, and that energy gives you what we call as life, because only when you have that energy do you have the enough force to do your living activities. So when I'm saying biosphere and I'm saying life and living, you are primarily looking at carbon plus carbon compounds. Carbon and carbon compounds. This is an important thing. So when I'm saying life or biosphere means the living component or the biological component of the earth, understand biological component here indicates your organic components. What is organic? Organic is anything that has carbon and carbon compounds in it. So if I had to put it out like that, when I'm saying biosphere, it is not just the moving, living things which are there. Even your dead organic matter is part of biosphere. Why is dead organic matter part of biosphere? Because it has carbon and carbon compounds. Got it? So when I'm saying life is the feature of biosphere, understand life means organic nature and organic nature means carbon. Got it? So the differentiating factor at this point between environment and biosphere is environment has everything. Living, non-living, abiotic, biotic, all of these things. Biosphere is used to indicate only those things which are organic / living / biotic in nature. I hope these terms are clear. Now, if these terms are clear, the next term that we have to look forward is something called as habitat. Okay, this is a point where I need you guys to just rein back a little bit and think of all the terms I have just told you. Environment is there, biosphere is there, fine. Now, before I go into this, I want you to understand, very similar to the word habitat, you have some more terms called as a territory, home, range, etc. First, let's try to understand habitat and I'll tell you the differences between each of this. So, environment is large, it's living, non-living, everything. Biosphere is just the living part. Okay. Now, habitat. Habitat is literally the, I could say, the address of an organism. This is something that I keep telling students, but a lot of you just use it like a definition. I'm telling this to make you understand certain concepts. So if I'm saying habitat is the address of an organism, what does it mean over here? Address of an organism means if that organism is not there, I cannot define the address of it. It's address of an organism, which means when I'm saying habitat, I'm defining habitat with respect to a organism. Got it? It is the address of the organism. It is the physical environment in which an organism lives. Got it? So, if I had to define any habitat, the important thing is I need to know, there should be primarily an organism over there. Then only I can say, okay, that organism is there and the organism is living over here. So, this is the habitat of the organism. Got it? So, you guys just think for a moment and tell me, how is this different from environment then? You are there in a surrounding. You are, surrounded by a lot of things. If I look at you right now, I can say that, okay, you are sitting in your room with your stuff and everything over there. That could be your habitat, right? How is that different from environment then? And this is where you have to understand, to define environment, I did not define it using an organism. Why? You remember I told you in the beginning itself, if I remove you from that room, the environment still remains. Got it? The environment is still there. But as for habitat, what happens? When you are removed from the room, that is no longer your habitat. Your habitat has changed to where your physical environment is right now at. And to put it into very simple terms, I just have to remember this much. In an environment, I don't care if there is no living organism also, you can have an environment. There is, for example, there is no living organism, anything over there. You have some, just air and water and everything. That is environment. There is no compulsion that there should be a living organism. But to define a habitat, because habitat is the address of an organism, what is the primary requirement? The primary requirement is an organism should be there. Got it? So, this is the first differentiating factor between a habitat and an environment. An environment can have living organisms, need not have living organisms, can interact with abiotic, all of that can happen. But in a habitat, must have a living organism. Okay? So, habitat is the physical environment in which an organism lives. And if I had to maybe take a large environment, different living organism. For example, here you are there. There is one, your other friend. There is another animal over here. There is a plant over here. Each of this has a physical environment in which they live, and together all those habitats make up the environment. Because in one large environment, all of your different things are there. Is it necessary that habitat should necessarily make up an environment? Look, this is a habitat. This is a habitat. Now, in that habitat, in that address, if I am removing the living organism, This is no longer the habitat of it, but still it remains as the environment. Why? Because it is having abiotic factors. It can see, again, that's the point over here. It can have abiotic, can have biotic, they can interact. These are all cans over there. Here, it must have a living organism. Okay. Now, if this term is clear to you, we need to go a little bit more deeper into this concept. And I want you guys to think of it on I'll tell you an example which is, very easily relatable to you. So just keep that in mind whenever you get confused with these terms. There are two more terms called as territory and home range. Let's put it like this. Territory is equivalent. When it comes to organisms, we'll come there. But for example, you have a space, you call it, like I have a personal space. If someone crosses a personal space, you get very defensive. You're like, no, don't come that close to me. Just stay there and talk. Right? So what happens over here? It's a boundary that you are creating. You are creating. It's not defined by nature or anything. You are creating a boundary where you feel comfortable enough. And if you don't feel comfortable when someone crosses that boundary, you fight against it. Okay. So similarly, animals also have their own territories. Animals, live organisms, plants, anyone can form their own territory. Why do they need the territory? They need the territory because it's a kind of a defense mechanism for it. You would have seen, if you have, street dogs and everything, the moment the first thing itself is, if you have a dog in any surroundings, they go and pee and mark territory over there. Okay. And that is like somehow they're saying like, you cross this area, I'm going to chase you. And the moment even a small other dog or anything tries to cross that, it gets so violent, it keeps on barking and howling. You would have seen that even if you try to cross it in your bike or car, it comes running behind. The reason being what? You are crossing a territory of that organism. Now, depending on how big the animal is and how strong the animal is, it will keep on defending its territory. Tigers are another creature which draw clear territories. Lions, all of these huge organisms, what happens is they have a territory that they call, or think of it as their personal space. So it's a live organism's boundary to determine their demands, mark and defend it. Now my question is an entire habitat going to be the territory of that organism? Not necessarily. Why? Because habitat is a much more larger concept. Habitat means, for example, this habitat that I am marking over here. Okay. Now, you have the habitat. This is a habitat of, let's say there is a tiger over there. This is also the habitat of maybe another fox or something. Okay. So, animals can share their habitats. You can have the fox having tropical rainforest as its habitat. You can also have the tiger having tropical rainforest as its habitat. But territory is a much more smaller concept, which means that when the tiger is like, this is my territory, that will not be shared by the fox, because if the fox is trying to share it, the tiger will fight against it. The tiger will try to defend it. Got it? So, habitat can have coexistence of different creatures because it all belongs to a larger environment. This is the point where I tell you that a single habitat may be common for more than one organism which may have similar requirements. So, a single habitat can be shared by different organisms, but territory on the other hand is a boundary created, and if you try sharing that, the point is it will get defended. Okay. Now, the final word is home range. Okay. This home range has something to do with the daily activities of an animal. Okay, the amount of space an animal uses on a regular basis is called its home range. Okay, it can stretch for many miles or they can be only a few feet. Now, let's for a moment compare home range and territory alone. You have a larger habitat. So this is this thing that I've drawn over here. This is a habitat. It's shared by the tiger and the fox and some maybe ducks or something and some birds. All of them have the same habitat. Each of them might, see again, territory is not the concept where, okay, necessarily they will draw a territory. Some organisms do, some organisms don't. Irrespective of territory, all of them have a habitat. Okay, so territory is not a condition where, okay, that animal should have a territory. That animal, it depends on the size of the animal, it depends on the amount of defensive power it has. That is how it will draw territory. Now coming into home range, now think of it. What is the daily activity of a tiger? It has to wake up, it has to go to hunt, maybe drink some water, get the food back to its area wherever it is, maybe mate, not on a daily basis, but yeah, okay. So this is the activity of it. Now to do that activity in this entire habitat of the tiger might be occupying certain spaces, certain routes for it. Those spaces are called as your home range. So first point, will the tiger's home range be just within its territory? No. Territory, as I told you, is a much more smaller concept. If your territory is just like, for example, let's think of what will be the problem if the territory of the organism and the home range of the organism were the same thing. Now, tiger has a territory. If this is the territory of the tiger and the tiger keeps on defending anyone who comes in, do you think the tiger will be able to find prey within its territory? No. It will not be able to find prey within its territory because you will have multiple organisms that come in through different areas and these might not be the food that the tiger eats. Okay, so the tiger is like, no, I will not get out of my territory. Tiger will starve. This is the area where the tiger can, maybe the cubs or any mating or anything is happening over here, or its shelter is there. So what happens is it will try to defend it, but for its preying activities it will have to get out of the territory, and it will have to get out of the territory, go and find the prey, kill the prey, maybe drag it back to this area. This larger area is called as your home range. Now my next question is, will the territory and the home range be inside the habitat itself? Yes, it will be inside the habitat. Territory is a smaller concept, home range is a larger concept. Even if it's a smaller or larger concept, what's going to be? It is all covered in that habitat, because if the habitat has changed. Now for example, let's say that the tiger's habitat is tropical evergreen forest. It needs, suppose, it needs all that warmth and the rain and everything. Now the tiger is going on and the tiger is trying to find prey. It's going on and on and on and on, and it's traveling to such a distance where now it has reached to a tropical deciduous forest. Now my question is, if it has now gone till there, you can say that is its home range, but will it be able to find the prey that it requires over there? No, because the tiger has evolved for a tropical evergreen forest. Its prey is going to be in the tropical evergreen forest. If it goes to a desert or a tropical deciduous area, just because it went over there, it might not be able to find the prey required over there, which means ideally the animal's habitat will encompass the territory and the home range of the animal. Okay, to make things clear, this is an example that we do in our classes which are there. So this area where, you know, in Bangalore where the IAS hub is there, this area is called as Vijayanagara. Okay, now if you are a UPSC aspirant in Bangalore, what is your habitat going to be? Your habitat is going to be Vijayanagara. Okay, Vijayanagara, or you know, they call it mostly Chandra layout or whatever. Okay, so let's put it like this. So your habitat is Vijayanagara area. Okay, now what will your home range be? Vijayanagara has all of these ecosystems, and leave the ecosystem part. Vijayanagara has all of these institutes of different IAs and everything happening. The organism, what will be your home range? Ideally, your home range would be, okay, you get out of your hostel, then, you know, in that area, whatever is there, you go to the institute that is there, you eat food, you come back to your hostel. This is your home range. Your home range is still in your habitat? Yes. Okay. Then, what about when it comes to territory? Which will be your territory? Your territory will be just your hostel room. Because you will be like, no, I don't want anyone to come inside. This is my room. You cannot say like, nobody enter Vijayanagara or nobody cross my path when I am walking to the institute. You cannot do that. You defend the territory that is much more smaller. So I hope all of these concepts are clear to you with that example. So think on those lines if you are having a confusion. So with that, now we have done habitat. Now the difference between habitat and environment is, like, I'll just read this out and I want you to quickly get it into your heads. Don't mug it up. Please don't mug it up. Okay. All habitats are environments. Think of it. Are all habitats environments? Is in whatever area that you are there in, is it an environment? Yes, it is. But all environments are not habitats. Why are all environments not habitats? All environments are not habitats because for a habitat to be there, you require an organism. An environment can have an organism, need not have an organism. A habitat always has life in it. It's an absolute statement, but is it a correct statement? Yes, it is a correct statement. Why? Because it always has life. You're defining habitat with respect to the organism. Whereas the environment does not necessarily have life in it. The environment governs the properties of a habitat. That's also correct because see, now you have a larger environment in the southern part of India maybe, and maybe in Kerala and Karnataka, and it's that entire environment will determine what all habitats are present. In some habitats, you're going to have maybe evergreen forest, you're going to have western Ghats, in some habitats you're going to have deciduous, but all of that is determined by the larger environment over there. And what is environment? The different biotic or the abiotic factors existing over there. Okay, so I hope till now it's all clear. Now we have to move a little bit more into the concept where we have to start hitting the concept of ecosystem, etc. So now as we go further, if the terms of environment and everything is clear, now we have, let's start from us. We are an organism, we are an individual organism. Now what happens is, if similar individuals are put together, like for example, I am a human, so you have similar human beings all put together, you call it as a population. And from then onwards, depending on different criteria, you have different levels of organization. Okay, why is this levels of organization important to us? It's important to us to understand as to, when I'm saying a larger concept like biome or biosphere, you need to know what all is included in it and what all is not included in it. This is the point. Now, before I go into these levels, here it starts with the concept of individual. Now, one thing, this is not, I wouldn't call it purely environment or anything, but I want you to have an idea about this part. Because a lot of students, when they see the words phylum and order and all, they just blank out. They're like, I have not done science in 12th and I don't know this. That's not the thing. Let's just have a quick idea into it. See, now we started off this calculation with individual. Now understand, even here also, an individual can be divided or individual can be organized on different criteria. The individual will be part of a species. I've taken the example of red fox over here. The scientific name or the Latin name of the red fox is Vulpes vulpes. Now, let's have a look at it. The species is called as Vulpes vulpes. Genus is a bigger concept, that is just Vulpes. It all belongs to the family Canidae, and in this family you have other organisms like your wolf, coyotes, etc., not just your fox. Beyond the family there is a concept called as order, which is Carnivora, and then you have class, which is Mammalia. Then you have phylum, which is Chordata, kingdom, which is Animalia, and domain, which is Eukarya. Now, why have I told you this? I've told you this, first of all, understand the orders of organizations over here. The simplest one being species, then you have genus, family, order, class, phylum, kingdom, at least a kingdom, remember, okay? So, species is the smallest, genus is the bigger, then you have family, you have order, then you have class, and then you have phylum. Now, the reason I am telling you this, here look at it, when it comes to family, by the time you've reached the concept of family, you have different organisms that are forming part of it. It's not just the fox alone right now. You have fox and then you have your wolf and coyotes, etc. When it comes to order, again, that gets a little bit more larger. When it comes to class Mammalia, we also belong to that. We also belong to class Mammalia, which means suddenly the fox and us are all in the same class. When it comes to phylum, it becomes even much more bigger. So, this levels you have to remember, for the reason being that, one, when UPSC gives you a question about phylum or order or class, you need to know how small it is or how big it is. If they are saying, they'll take a concept like species and they'll say that humans and tiger belong to the same species. You know that's wrong. Got it. So, or humans and tiger belong to the same genus. That's wrong. But humans and tiger belong to the same class. That's correct. Humans and tigers belong to the same phylum. That's correct. So you need to know which is a bigger or a smaller concept so that you can tackle simple statements like this. Okay, so this is not, I would say this is not environment. This is just scientific ideas that you have to have in your mind. Now coming back to the environment part. So if we are starting from individual, the higher level of individual is population, where look at this picture. This is a picture I've been using for several years because this is one thing that will stay in your minds and in my mind also for like a really long time. Whenever you look at this population, you will see that it's similar nature. There's an orange fish over here. There are similar natured creatures in population. They have not included anything else, which means what? Population will have similar individuals. Then beyond population, you are having something called as community. In community, now you have orange fish, there's a crab, there's a blue fish, there is some jellyfish, there is plant, which means what all takeaways can you form from community? Communities can have plants and animals, and communities can have different categories of organisms, different types of organisms. They're not all orange fish, there is blue, there is jellyfish, there is some creatures and all. That is your community. But there's one thing that's common. All the things that are there in the community, it seems like they have life in it. They have not shown any abiotic factors. They've just shown biotic factors. So I'm going to define community as a collection of biotic or a collection or a group of different biotic factors that are put together. Okay. Now go a little bit beyond and then you see a word ecosystem. And in ecosystem you are seeing there is the previous set of organisms itself. There's the crab, there's the grass, there is the orange fish, there's the blue fish, there's jellyfish. But there is two other things also. There is a stone and there's water right now. And don't think they just thought, okay, let's make the picture pretty and they put it there. No, it means something. Which means in ecosystem, you have biotic factors and abiotic factors. We discussed something which had biotic and abiotic factors earlier. There was environment which had biotic and abiotic factors. So now we have to explore what is the difference between environment and ecosystem. And that is what we are going to discuss now. See, let's break it down simple. Environment is there. There is ecosystem. In environment, you have biotic factors and you have abiotic factors, and they were interacting with each other. Okay. Now, when it comes to an ecosystem, it's the same thing, but here there is a added level. There is an added concept involved over here. Environment is always defined as the functional unit of nature. Whenever you see anything defined as functional unit, understand you are defining that based on the different activities that are happening over there. For example, function. What is your function? Most of you would think, yeah, my function right now is to sit and study and pass the exam. So when you look, or when you are taken into a larger concept, you might be an individual, you might have other hobbies, you might have other friends and everything. But if I'm just defining you based on your function, what would be you called as? You are a student whose function is to study and pass the exam. Got it? That doesn't mean that you don't have other existences. You are a human being. You are the daughter or son of your parents. You are a friend to so many people. You are an individual with some other hobbies. These are all different dimensions of yours. But when I have to define you based on your function, I define you as so-and-so person who has a work of so-and-so. Maybe your function is to take care of your parents. Okay, fine. Maybe your function is to earn for the family. Yes, that is also. So each of this is you getting defined based on it. Now, if I have to define your larger environment based on the functions it has, it's called as an ecosystem. Why? Okay. So let's look at what is happening over there. So what is an environment? I said it is it has biotic factors, abiotic factors, they interact with each other. Now the same thing, if I had to define as an ecosystem, I would say it is a group of abiotic factors and biotic factors interacting among themselves and with each other to form different products and services. What is the difference over here? Here you have defined it in the terms of work. When I asked you what's your function, what did we end up defining it as? I have to study, that's the first part, and pass the exam. That's the outcome of it. So here in the ecosystem, they have to interact and they have to create something which is different products and services. And when I define something in that terms, it's called as ecosystem. So what exactly should your mind be tuned to understanding? Your mind should be understanding the fact that ecosystem means you are defining something, can be any part, in terms of its functions, in terms of what it does and what it creates. So there are two parts. In environment, you are just saying what it does, but in an ecosystem, you are saying what it does, what it is creating. Because if you are creating something, that is what the functional part of it is. Okay, so if I can define ecosystem, it's defined as a functional unit of nature where living organisms interact among themselves and also with the surrounding physical environment. Why I have not said anything more over there? Why? Because I have called it already as a functional unit. When I'm saying something is a functional unit, it is implied over there that you are forming any useful products and services. Or can I also define ecosystem as, okay, let's put it like this. I've seen a lot of students do this. Can I define ecosystem as a community of different organisms? No. If it's just community of organisms, is there any work attached to it? No. A community of organisms interacting with each other and with the environment, if till that part, it's okay, but it's not a complete definition, because the interacting part is there. It has to do something more, which is what? That some amount of energy is exchanged, there is some process, there is some system, etc. So let's break it down. An ecosystem's definition should have biotic factors. Not in per se terms. Don't be like, okay, in that term they didn't mention biotic. Biotic means what? They should have some idea about the living organisms. There can be non-living organisms, not non-living organisms, non-living stuff. Then interaction between each other and with the surrounding areas. And all of this should lead to some products, services. Now my point is, if they just give biotic and abiotic factors in interacting with each other, will that be a complete definition of ecosystem? No, because it's more or less like a definition of environment. So if they have to differentiate between environment and ecosystem, if it's a very difficult question, always look out for the functional part. Which statement has something that creates something? It's a statement where they are indicating something is getting made, a process is done, a product is created. That would be a ecosystem. So ecosystems can be defined as man-made and natural, terrestrial and aquatic. You can even have a single tree or a single thing as a ecosystem. Why? Because you are going to have different interactions and they're going to create something out of it. So this is the reason why even tree, which is a single organism, can be categorized as an ecosystem. So I hope this part is clear. So when you have an ecosystem, I just told you there are abiotic factors, biotic factors. Abiotic and abiotic factors interact with each other. Biotic and biotic interact with each other. Abiotic and biotic interact with each other. Now this entire thing, this interaction, when it creates a product or service, this is called as an ecosystem. So each point I told you, this interaction which is there, biotic and biotic is interacting, abiotic and abiotic is interacting. When I have to study each of these interactions in detail, because then only I'll be able to understand what an ecosystem is made out of, right? So the study of the interactions between organisms and the surroundings occurring within an ecosystem is called as ecology. So that is the study of these different. So if I'm studying this interaction, it's part of ecology. This interaction, it's part of ecology. This interaction is also part of ecology. That's the study of different interactions. Now, to quickly do a previous year question, which one of the following is the best description of the term ecosystem? Come on, just have a, now again, when you have statements where it's best describes the term ecosystem, don't look for the definition that was taught in class, because they might try to confuse you by giving you a statement which is close enough. So look at it, find out the one which is close enough as a definition of ecosystem. So to read the statement, which one of the following is the best description of the term ecosystem? A community of organisms interacting with one another, that part of the earth which is inhabited by living organisms, a community of organisms together with the environment in which they live, the flora and fauna of a geographical area. Which would be the correct one? So let's take out the ones which we are least bothered about. That part of the earth which is inhabited by the organisms is clearly your biosphere. The flora and fauna of a geographical area is something called as biodiversity, which we'll study later. Then you have two terms: a community of organisms interacting with one another, a community of organisms together with the environment in which they live. Which out of this is a better definition? None of this is like the ultimate ideal definition. Which one is the better definition? The better definition over here is something that here in the first place, it's like a community of organisms, just biotic things interacting with one another. Here it is community of organisms together with the environment in which they live. Here, the one that's closer to the definition of ecosystem has biotic and abiotic factors, and the answer is C. In A, the problem is they have made it just biotic factors interacting with each other. That does not come closer to the definition of ecosystem, because in ecosystem, one of the first things I told you is this is biotic and abiotic factors which are there. So I hope by this question, this concept has been clear. Now let's move on to the different components of an ecosystem. So I just now told you there is biotic factors and there is abiotic factors. The abiotic factors are your energy, rainfall, temperature, etc. Now I have to introduce you to a word called as limiting factor. Okay, limiting factor is a concept associated with your abiotic factor. Associated with your abiotic factors. What exactly is a limiting factor? When it comes to a limiting factor is very easy to understand if we think of our own situations. But before, I'll just give you the definition and see how we can associate it with our situations. So, every organism has certain environmental conditions in which it will grow, flourish, and it will be really good at. Okay, it is growing in a good manner. When those conditions are not there, what happens? Its growth is shortened. It becomes difficult for it to live. Its distribution is shortened. All of these things happen. Okay, let's take your example. When your ideal condition is sitting at home, eating good food, getting the constant affection of your parents or whatever, and it's that is your ideal condition. Okay. When you come and stay at hostel, you are not given all your ideal conditions. Food is not great. You don't have affection anywhere, and then suddenly, you feel like you don't feel yourself, right? You feel like you have not flourished at that point. That is because certain conditions which were good for you are not present anymore. If those conditions were there, just imagine, maybe it's a new scenario, it's a hostel, but you have ghar ka khana and you have everything given to you in a very perfect manner, you would be perfectly happy in that scenario also. You would study well, you would, go and maybe, when you go for the test, you will be in a much more happier way, you will be less tensed. All of these things can happen, which means you are limited. You are limited by certain conditions that you used to have. Meaning what? You used to have good conditions. There were environmental conditions that were ideal for you. Now those conditions are not there. That is why you are limited. Okay, so the blame is on those environmental conditions. They have given you such good growth that now you are not able to do without it. Which means those conditions are your limiting factors. Those environmental conditions that limit the growth, abundance or distribution of an organism or population of organisms in an ecosystem are your limiting factors. You are held back by those factors which are ideal to you. Understand? If you never had any ideal factors, you would very be happy in a hostel situation also. You would be like, yeah, this is perfect. But you had an ideal environmental condition and now you are limited because that environmental condition is not there for you. I hope you got the idea. So a lot of times I have seen students think the opposite thing. You are not. So for example, you had ideal conditions in your home. And then when you come to the hostel, I've seen students define that the conditions at the hostel are the limiting factor. No. Conditions at the hostel are not the limiting factor. The conditions that have trained you for a better growth and abundance, suddenly when they are not there, those are your limiting factors. Okay, so next time you get less marks in test, call home and say, see, this is the reason. You are limiting factor. The house conditions are the limiting factors. Understand? So, on our other side, so can I define also limiting factors like, if in an ideal scenario, you would have done very well if those environmental conditions are there. So which means those are the conditions which are most essential to you. Can I say it like that? Those are the conditions which are most essential for your growth, abundance and distribution. But somehow it's not there, so it became limiting factor. Okay, so limiting factors are environmental conditions that limit growth, abundance, distribution, etc. But they are also the most essential factors. That is the reason there is so much of importance on them. See, if it was like some simple thing that you could get over easily, then it's not a limiting factor. You will not be that affected by it. Right? But you are so dependent on it. You find it so essential that suddenly when that thing is not there, that limits your growth. So I can also define limiting factors as the most essential factors that are needed for the growth, abundance, etc. of an organism. Okay. So out of when I have to define limiting factors, also now let's take a plant. Okay. A plant has the needs of everything. It needs soil, it needs water, it needs good sunlight, it needs nutrients, all of these things. These are the ideal conditions. Okay. Out of this itself, maybe there is a condition that's very essential for it. Leave that part. Ideally, these all things are there. If you take a plant and put it into an area where none of these things are there in a proper amount, what will happen to it? It will not grow. Why is it not growing? It's not growing because those factors which are needed for its growth are not present. The growth is limited by the lack of essential conditions. Okay. Now here is where I want to introduce you to another concept called as your Liebig's law of the minimum. So I hope now limiting factor is clear. If limiting factor is clear, then comes an important thing. So you have, let's pick your case again. So what all do you get at home? Let's compare at home scenario, which is very essential and ideal for you. Okay, essential conditions are there. What all do you get at home? You get good food. You get maybe a good amount of, each and every need of yours. The money part is sorted. Then you get affection. You get care. Okay, you're surrounded by people who care for you. Okay. These are all your essential factors, which also means these are all your limiting factors. Now, out of all of this, there must be one factor that you are very dependent on. Like, okay, I can adjust all the other things, but this is the problem. This one thing, if I am not getting, then it becomes very, very difficult for me to live. Which could be that factor? I mean, it depends. Okay. So let's say I am picking affection. I can adjust food. I can adjust money. I can adjust the care part. But affection, I need constant affection. Then, out of all this becomes my most essential factor. Now, when I'm put into a new scenario, which one factor's lack would affect me the most? This one. Why? Because when I'm in my ideal conditions, this is what I am most dependent on, most essential. Now, when I am in a very bad condition, when I am in very difficult situations, even if all of these other things are available, if this is not available, that becomes the single reason why I am not doing well. Got it? So, essentially, Liebig's law of the minimum says growth is controlled not by the total amount of resources available, but by the scarcest resource. And the scarcest resource becomes the most essential resource. I hope this is clear. I take these examples so that it's easier for us to understand. You don't always necessarily have to take plants and everything to understand environment. We are also part of the environment. We are also part of certain conditions which are there. So, yeah, I hope this is clear to you right now. What are limiting factors? Out of the limiting factors itself, which is the most important limiting factor? I hope all of these concepts are now clear to you. Now, let's go into the different abiotic factors which are there. Some of the most important abiotic factors start off with concepts like temperature, rainfall, frost, snow, etc. Let's have a quick look into it. Temperature. What is the problem when there is an increase in temperature or a decrease in temperature? When there is increase or decrease in temperature, what happens is, see, temperature primarily is the degree of warmness or coldness which is there. So what happens is, when temperature either increases or decreases, the moisture content in your organisms, get affected. When the moisture content gets affected, sometimes if the temperature is increasing, what happens? The moisture will get pulled out. It will get drier. If the temperature is dropping, then what happens is the moisture in the organism. What is moisture? Water content gets frozen. It becomes difficult for the organisms to function. So, in whatever cases, if the temperature, each organism has an ideal set of temperatures where it can grow. If it goes beyond it or lower than that, what happens is the temperature affects the moisture, and moisture is so important because moisture means the water content which is there in every cell of the organism. Every cell of the organism has water content, which means if the temperature is dropping or going higher, and I'm saying it's affecting the moisture content, every cell of it starts getting affected, and it can either dry out or it can get, it will, in any case, what is going to happen is it will become very fatal for the organism. Now moving on to another very important factor called as light. See, light has two criteria, and this is very important to understand. Light, whenever we are describing light, you can have something called as wavelength or frequency associated with it. Okay, so based on the wavelength or frequency, we have different rays starting from radio waves, infrared, visible light, ultraviolet, X-rays, gamma, etc. So whenever I use the word wavelength or frequency or anything, understand I'm trying to use any of these other lights, other radiations which are there. And in middle somewhere there is something called as visible light. Visible light is what we all use to see each other, etc. Now in visible light, you will have a range where we can all see, right? So there you do not generally use wavelength frequency category. Here, one thing that becomes very important is the intensity of light. The intensity of light. Based on both of these factors, we have a few effects on the plant condition which is there. Let's have a look now. So now when we describe light and different factors associated with it, understand that when you have, let's put it like this. So there is high intensity light. High intensity light means the same visible radiation that you have, the visible light that you have, you are giving it in a manner where, for example, let's put it like this. You have light that can be spread out in this manner. You have a plant over here. And then you have light which can be focused simply on the plant. Which do you think is receiving more intensity? Intensity means the amount of light per a specific area. Which is having more intensity over here? More intensity is associated with this one. So when you have extremely high intensity light, what happens over here is, it is going to favor the root growth rather than shoot growth. Now this is quite interesting. Why? Because we assume that, okay, the plant needs light to function. Okay, the plant needs light for photosynthesis and everything. So you give more light to it, it should do more photosynthesis, right? But that's not what is happening. The more intensity light you are giving, what is happening to it is, you have certain plant growth hormones okay, and these plant growth hormones are the ones that can help the root or the shoot to grow. For example, if the root needs to function properly, you have a plant growth hormone called as auxins. Okay. Now, what is going to happen is, ideally, you have auxins, you have shoot, and everything is growing in a perfect manner. Now, suddenly I'm giving high intensity light. What happens is, the amount of auxins produced in the plant when it comes to the roots is going to be much more in comparison to the other plant growth hormones. Which means what? Why is this happening? That is primarily to do with how much of what is getting triggered in the plant, what hormones are getting produced, all of those reasons. But anyway, you're giving more intensity light means there's more of root growth hormones that are generated. When those root growth hormones are generated, what is going to happen is, you will have the root growing on in a very, very good manner, but the shoot of the plant will not be growing in commensurate manner to it. So the root of the plant will be going, getting water and everything, but the shoot of the plant, because it's not getting or it's not growing at the same pace, I'm not saying it's not growing at all, it's growing, but it's not growing equivalent to the root. What is going to happen is, it looks like it has a short stem, it has smaller, thicker leaves and increased transpiration. Why? Because all this water that is taken in by the root somehow needs to be let out of the plant. And in this manner, eventually what is going to happen? It is going to have a very stunted growth. So on one hand, high intensity light has triggered root growth in a good manner, but the shoot hasn't grown. And low intensity of light if you are giving, what happens is, again, here you are not going to aid growth or flowering or fruiting, none of these things. Which means high intensity or low intensity, both of these have quite detrimental effects on the plant. This is also the reason why, I don't know how many of you have noticed this, but when you have when you want to delay the fruiting of something, or when you want to delay the ripening of fruits, you end up putting it in darker places. You end up putting it in darker places because low intensity of light retards growth, flowering, fruiting, etc. Okay. Now this is a case of visible light. In the case of visible light, this is what happens. Now, other than that, if you're giving different colors of light, red light, blue light, what happens? In the case of red light, it aids the flowering of the plant, fruit production, etc. In the case of blue light, what is going to happen? Chlorophyll is going to get produced more. Strong, durable, healthy stems and leaves are also produced. So, understand each of these has a different effect. Intensity has different effect. Color has different effect. So always remember, when light related questions come, these are the two factors that they could question you on: intensity and the color. And color is also determined. See, and look at over here. So here I am saying red light and blue light. Just have a look over here. If you look at the wavelengths of what is a wavelength from here till here, how much is there? So this is your infrared light, this is your ultraviolet light, more closer to your bluer side. Which has a higher wavelength over here? Higher wavelength is for infrared. This has lower wavelength. Okay, so can I also say in this statement, red light or higher wavelength light aids the flowering of plant and fruit production, and here lower wavelength of light gives your chlorophyll production, strong durable things? Yes, that can also be mentioned. So just keep these points in mind. Now moving on to another abiotic factor, which is your snow. So now when we come to the concept of snow, which is another abiotic factor, see, we already mentioned the idea that when it comes to temperature dropping, temperature obviously can have a very bad impact, and it can lead to the freezing up of the moisture in your cells. Now snow, on the other hand, over here is the precipitate falling from the skies. So here snow has two impacts. On one hand, snowfall, which is the precipitate directly falling onto the ground, can damage your trees, your branches and everything because of the heavy impact of it. Okay, and even accumulated snow can actually break your branches, etc. So that can be a bad effect. On the other side, what also happens is, snow, whenever it falls, what happens is any seeds or seedlings that remain in the ground, they get protected from what you say, the other external predators or anything which is there. So on one hand, the grown plants are not very happy when it snows, but the seeds and seedlings are happy, as because what happens is once the snow melts, even that moisture aids the growth of these seeds and seedlings. Okay. Now, as we move from your different abiotic factors, we are now moving into another concept called as ecosystem services. See, I told you very clearly when we spoke about ecosystem itself, the ecosystem is interaction of biotic, abiotic factors, and they give out certain products or services, which meant that there are some services created out of the ecosystem. And when I'm saying services created out of the ecosystem, until very recently, we didn't bother about any of these things, because we are like, yeah, it gives us fruits and yeah, it's all there for us to utilize it. But what has happened is, then you had something called as your Millennium Ecosystem Assessment in 2005. So, Millennium Ecosystem Assessment was undertaken by several UN bodies together, and what they came up with is, we have to divide all the ecosystem services based on what we are getting out of it, what is the value of it, etc. And they divided it into 4 major categories. There's something called as provisioning services, then there is regulating services, supporting services, and cultural services. So let's have a look at it. Provisioning services means the ecosystem is doing certain activities. When again, what is ecosystem? The biotic, abiotic factors are doing certain activities, and they're giving out certain provisions. Provisions means what? Something that's very quantifiable. Food, water, raw materials, medicinal resources, ornamental resources, genetic resources. These are all products that we're getting from it. And anytime you get a very quantifiable product from the ecosystem, it's categorized as a provisioning services. It's giving us certain provisions. Okay, then you have certain services called as your regulating services. Regulating services means the ecosystem is doing a lot of activities and it is able to control and sometimes even fully determine the different kinds of features that we have. So let's have a look at it. Regulating services. The ecosystem can regulate climate, water flow, the air quality which is there, the pollution levels, the purification of water, soil, etc. All of these things can be regulated and can also be determined by the ecosystem, and this is called as regulating services. When you look at regulating services are not very, it's not like you can quantify it. You cannot see like, okay, yeah, so this much of climate was regulated, or this much of climate was controlled by ecosystem. You cannot quantify it, but still its impacts are felt. Now you have another category of services called as supporting services. Supporting services are those services done by the ecosystem in a manner in which both provisioning and regulating services are helped by these category of services. I'll just let's put it very clearly. You have a tree, okay? Now from the tree, the provisioning service that you get is raw material, food, water. So that's clear. Then regulating service that you get from the tree is obviously you have your, the air balance is maintained, the purity is maintained, all that is a regulating service. How is all of this service possible? The service is possible because the tree is existing in a good manner, right? There is a life cycle of the tree is able to live through its entire life cycle. How is the tree able to live through its entire life cycle? It's able to live through its entire life cycle because the ecosystem has somehow facilitated its means. Somehow the temperature, again, how did that come? The temperature came again because somewhere else or someplace else, the ecosystem is functioning in a good manner. So, supporting services are those services which help your ecosystem to function so that provisioning and regulating services are done in a proper manner. So, for example, one life cycle maintenance is a supporting service. Why? Because if you do not have life cycle, you cannot have provisioning and regulating. If the tree is not living through its entire life, then is there any point saying that no, tree should give us provisioning, tree should give us regulating? No, because life cycle is not maintained. So, supporting services aid provisioning and regulating services. Then finally, you have a set of services called as cultural services. Cultural services are something that's very, very intangible. Recreation, tourism, aesthetic values, education, research, peace, sustainability, mental well-being. All of these things are given from our ecosystem. The way we were able to categorize it into all of these four different kinds of functions was done by a Millennium Ecosystem Assessment. I hope ecosystem services are clear. In relation to this, we need to speak about another organization called as TEEB. TEEB becomes important because, see, okay, now in our FC classes where we discuss the entire story behind it and everything, but we don't have time for that right now. So I'll just quickly tell you what exactly was happening. The point is, see, when it came to your ecosystem, over the time, we felt the need to protect it. Now, if you wanted people to protect it, you needed it to be told to them in a way that, okay, see, it's valuable. Can you please protect it? Now, think of any scenario. If you are going and telling them, see, this tree is very important for us. The tree is going to protect, it's going to purify the environment. It's giving us so much food and water and everything. Can we please protect it? So they'll be like, okay, fine. We'll do one thing. We'll cut this tree. Then we'll make some other way for food, water and everything. Okay. So protection was not happening the way we wanted it to. It's at that point they got an idea. Let's give a list of all the services that the ecosystem does. And we gave a list called as in the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, they gave list like provisioning, regulating. Now they came about and they said, see, the tree is not just giving us food. The tree is giving us food. It's controlling the climate. It's doing this many as services. It's giving us 10 to 12 services. So please don't cut it. They were like, it's not very convincing. We can maybe, create some other way where we can provide these services, then we'll do something else. So it's that point, some organizations came forward and said, let's make them understand in the way that it will make sense to them. And they said, okay, the tree is giving you these 12 services. The bill for each of the services. So for each service, they put a monetary value to it. So suddenly what was just like 12 services, they said, okay, the tree is giving you 12 services and 12 services plus all the worth of it, it will come up to almost maybe 10 lakhs. So if you're cutting this tree, you're basically causing a loss of 10 lakhs to the economy. And then they got it. They're like, oh, then we should not cut it. So this is what TEEB did. TEEB is basically the economics of ecosystems and biodiversity, and it was created by Germany and European Commission. What they did is making nature's values visible. Instead of just saying it's a service, it's regulating, it's provisioning, they said this service is worth this much money, and now if you are destroying this part, you have to compensate it on money terms. Not being like, okay, we'll create one service. Got it? So this actually was something that was so monumental. Why? Because this suddenly, it meant that at every decision making level, you could use this criteria and determine if it was worth cutting down or clearing off an area and bringing up a development project or bringing up an electricity project. You could use this criteria and see how much loss are you creating. Is this something that you're creating over here going to compensate for that loss also? So Liebig made or gave monetary value to ecosystem services. That is why this is important. Now we are moving on to, we have successfully completed all the different definitions. We have completed the different ecosystem services. Now we are moving on to different principles in ecology. Now if you've reached the point till this video, this much part in the video, and if you understood things till now, just drop in the comments that okay, the first part is understood. Okay, so this is when I go through the video comments, so I'll at least have an idea that okay, fine, they've got it. So if you're watching it until this much part, if you've understood, just give in the comments or somewhere, just write the first part is understood. Okay, now we are moving into a level up, or let's put it like this, let's do it in this video where instead of first part, let's do levels. Okay, if you've understood all the stuff till now, you have crossed level 1. Just say level 1 understood. Okay, now from now onwards, what we're going to do is level 2. So at the end of the video, you can be like, okay, I've reached the highest difficulty level. Now, in level 2, let's start off with something called as principles of ecology. And in principles of ecology, the first principle that we have to study is adaptation. I don't know how many of you noticed that when I was saying biotic and abiotic factors, I mostly took the examples of plants. Now, that's primarily because plants have a restraint of mobility. Okay, so if something is bad for them, if there is a abiotic factor that is not suited to their conditions, they cannot be like, okay, fine, leave it, I am walking away from here. That cannot be done. But what happens is they slowly stay in that scenario and they try to make a change in some feature of theirs so that they will be suited to better conditions. Now, I want you to understand, when a certain, for example, right now in Bangalore, we, this is the time where normally it should have, there's going to be abundant rain or anything, but unfortunately now there is no rain. So for a very temporary period, now what is going to happen? The plants over here, which were dependent on these rainfalls, are going to have a little bit of suffering. Got it? So they are going to probably die out. But even next year and the year after that and several years from now onwards, if there are no rains in this period, the plant will be like, hey guys, now I have to do something to overcome this problem that is there, because otherwise that plant will be completely killed off. Completely killed off means that entire plant will not be there after 50 years you're looking. The plant will not be there because it did not get rain in the month of March and April and all of these months, May. Okay, so this is where you have to figure out how to cross certain problems that you have. And the first instance that you have for this, or the first, not technology, the first principle that you can do for this is adaptation. Adaptation is basically the appearance or behavior or structure or mode of life of an organism that allows it to survive in a particular environment. Adaptation can be morphological, physiological and behavioral. Morphological means to do something to do with the body parts, with the anatomy. Anatomy means the structure of your body. It is something to do with the structure of your body. Physiological means something that is happening inside your body. So inside your body, what all is there? There is a respiration, there is digestion, there is excretion, there is cells which are there. Something to do with the internal parts or internal activities of your body is physiological. And behavioral, you understand, is with the certain traits of the organism. So let's have a look at the different such kind of effects over here. First thing, morphological. Morphological is something to do, as I told you, with the anatomy of a creature. Anatomy of a creature means maybe you develop some part of your body, or for example, this is an example that I take up in class. Now think of it that over the time you wanted to, or humans or something, that we are here and we were suppose dependent on a tree for its food. So, and if the tree kept growing taller, what would happen? Short people like me would obviously be at a disadvantage. Then we'll try to like raise our legs, we'll try to raise our hands. Eventually, very slowly, this becomes a morphological trait that you have, that you are trying to reach out to your higher branches. Not in the same generation, very subsequent generations this might happen. So, similarly, these stages were there even in animals, and one very prominent example of a morphological feature is your giraffe. And what has happened in the giraffe is, the giraffe previously used to have a short neck. It keeps stretching and stretching and stretching along with it, and then what happens is, it started developing a much more longer neck. Now again, understand, this giraffe is not in the same generation, by the way. This will happen over several generations, and that is how it developed a morphological feature like that. Okay, so it's related to a body part. Now also understand, now when it comes to the physiological features, this is where we have, as I told you, it's something related to the internal activities of an organism. So if this in this cute little picture which is over here, I have something called as your kangaroo rat. So when it comes to the kangaroo rat, you will see that the physiological changes in it primarily equip it to. So if it's in a very hot condition, it cannot go and find prey then and there, and you cannot have it in such a situation that you have sandstorms and everything. So it is not going to be very feasible for it to get out of its shelter, go and find prey every now and then. So whenever it gets prey, what it does is, it consumes the prey and it stores the content of it in its body in the form of fat. And when in those times when it is not having enough prey, what happens is, this fat gets oxidized. This fat gets oxidized and it is consumed for different purposes, which means that you are primarily the internal functions of it is modified in such a way that it can be equipped to live in these conditions. To understand adaptations in a much more clearer manner, we need to look into a certain rule called as Allen's rule. Allen's rule tries to form a correlation between your surface area and volume. Surface area means what? The amount of area that is getting exposed outwards, and volume is the space that is occupied by a creature. So here, when it comes to surface area and volume, which is there, here you will see three different shapes, and you will see that in each of these cases, the volume is constant. So here we are also going to take the volume as constant. Volume means the different space that it is occupying is going to be constant. Here you can see volume is 8 over here. Volume is 8, volume is 8. But the surface area changes. Surface area over here in this cube shape, it's almost 24 that they have written. In this long shape, there is more surface area that is exposed out, that is 34. And in this cuboid shape, here it's a little bit more than the cube, that is almost 28. So the surface area has changed between each of this. If you look at this more rounded cube-like shape, the surface area is less. And then when you look at something that is taller, longer over here, the surface area is more. Allen's rule says that the body form or shape of something that occurs in warm climates, of animals or anything that occurs in warm climates, would generally be linear in shape. That means it'll look something like this. It's linear in shape. Linear in shape means, what is Allen's rule trying to say? Its surface area will be higher. Now my question is, why is surface area higher? Why should surface area be higher over there? See, in a hot climate, what you need is your body constantly needs to have a transfer of heat. Otherwise, internally in your body, the heat is going to build up. So the more surface area, there is more area for heat transfer to happen. That any creature, be it hot or cold, whatever happens is the body's surface area determines the heat transfer. In warm climates, you need more heat transferred out, and ideally you prefer a surface area which is linear. In cold climates, what happens is you don't need that much of a surface area. You can have something that is a little bit more, or you cannot lose your body's heat because you need to preserve your body's heat. To preserve the body's heat, what do you need? You need a much more rounded, compact section when it comes to your colder climates. So now this is a very general rule. Don't be like, okay, fine, this will always be the case. But for a lot of scenarios, you can use this rule and try to figure out. Like, for example, look at this picture which is there. In comparison, if you look, this is a snow leopard. In comparison to its other leopard brothers, leopard species, the clouded leopard and the normal leopard, the snow leopard is a much more chubby, rounded creature. Why? Because it's seen in cold climates and it needs to have a much more compact shape so that, there is no more surface area from where heat transfer can happen. Now, this creature, which is a desert fox, what happens over here? In this one, you can see that its entire shape is a much more linear shape. Why? Because it is occurring in hotter climates, warmer climates, and it needs to have much more heat transfer from its body surface. So keep that as a clue. Now, finally, moving on to the different kinds of desert plants, their adaptations, etc. This is a UPSC favorite thing. Let's have a quick look into it. The desert plants which are living in very xerophytic conditions. Xerophytic means where you do not have enough water. The roots of the desert plants extend vertically in the soil for great depths. The leaves of the desert plants are small sized. The stomata of the desert plants are going to be deep-seated. The leaves of the desert plants are surrounded by a waxy layer. One of the reasons is like when you have a waxy layer is where the stomata can be deep-seated. Why should the stomata be deep-seated? Because there is less water loss. Okay, the leaves are reduced to spines so that there is not so much of photosynthetic activity. In some cases, the photosynthesis happens by your stems. Okay, because you have lesser number of chloroplasts in your stems, and because of that itself, there is much lesser heat transfer that happens from that area. These are all the different kinds of adaptations that can happen in desert plants. Now, I have to introduce you to another term called as variations. Now, when it comes to, we discussed about adaptations on an individual level. Now, what happens on a larger scale when you have several kinds of organisms, or in one species itself, you have different individual organisms trying to adapt. What happens is, eventually as you go generation by generation, these differences start showing up either as genetic differences or as something that is there in your genomes, but it will not always get expressed outside. So what I intend to say that adaptations that might have maybe started as morphological or physiological or something, eventually what happens is they turn out to be genetic differences, and genetic differences in turn genetic differences, see, you can have different reasons by which you have genetic differences. For example, I'm a human, there's another human. We have a lot of genetic differences based on the environment we are in, based on our parents, etc. Okay, already genetic variations are a large set. Genetic variations can be caused by changing of genes, mutations, change in climates, geographical barriers, etc. All of these things can cause genetic variations. Now, what I intend to say is that these genetic variations can also be caused eventually by different adaptations, and vice versa. Genetic variations can cause adaptation, adaptation can cause genetic variations also. So this is something that can happen, and when variations happen in such a large level is where variations lead to the creation of new species, new organisms, etc. Okay, sometimes the organism gets better, and that is called as evolution. So understand, adaptation is the first step when it comes to this, or when you have a long-fledged method as to what can happen. You have adaptations, you have variations. From variations, you can have different kinds of genetic variations, and from genetic variations, you can go forward and it can even happen to evolution and so on and so forth. Okay. Now, what if it doesn't happen? What if evolution doesn't happen? What if these variations don't happen? Then what happens is something called as extinction, and this is what we have to discuss next. See, extinction is when a species cannot survive in changed conditions. It can be climate, it can be different, some maybe nutritional content is not served. Okay, because of any of these things, if it is not happening, what happens is you can get extinct. Now, in this way, you can have individual organisms getting extinct, and sometimes in the world, there can be such massive changes over a very short period of time, so much so that a large number of species get extinct. Okay, so you will have different kinds of causative factors, but the one common thing that you can see over there is large number of species getting extinct in a short period of time. Okay, and such features are called as mass extinctions. The world has already undergone 5 mass extinctions. You don't have to study all of it, just the important ones that I'll be saying. The first mass extinction happened almost, just clearing the slide so that you can see the rest part. The first mass extinction happened over 440 million years. So that is important. 440 million years ago, it was called as the first mass extinction. And then in that first mass extinction, you can see 85% of all of the existing species got extinct. Then the important one is the third mass extinction. The third mass extinction happened 250 million years ago. It is important because in the third mass extinction, almost 95% of the species got extinct, which is the largest mass extinction of all times. It happened in something called as your Permian era. Then the very recent mass extinction that you've had was just 145 million years ago, and that was your 5th mass extinction. So now what has happened over here is, after all of these mass extinctions, right now we are looking at the 6th mass extinction, where we are expecting the Earth will lose more than 3/4 of its species in a very short period of time. And this is going to be called as the Anthropocene extinction, because as opposed to all the other extinctions, the one that was there in 145 million years ago and even the ones previous to that, none of those were caused by human-related activities. But Anthropocene extinction, or the 6th mass extinction, is going to be caused by human-related activities. Okay. Now moving on to another important concept. You are still in level 2 itself. We have to discuss something called as ecological succession. See, what is succession? Succession primarily means that you are having, maybe when you call in a generations or something, you are succeeded by your kids, or you have different generations coming out. What exactly is happening? That someone else is taking the place that you have held. Okay. Ecological succession, something very similar. It says it's the process by which communities of plants and animal species in an area are replaced or changed into another over a period of time. Changed into another. What happens over here? So let's take an example, or let's go to the beginning of time when the Earth was completely rock and there was absolutely nothing over there. From then onwards, we have had multiple rounds of extinctions, as I just told you. But still, even today, what has happened? When you look around, you are seeing forests, you are seeing areas which are having different types of forest: evergreen, deciduous, tropical, temperate, different kinds of forest and grass. All of these things are around us. So, how is it that how is that process happening? This process or this change can be explained by a concept called as ecological succession. Ecological succession primarily means that you, based on the availability of certain conditions, you have multiple community changes over the time. Now here, I have had a question asked by a lot of students: why whenever we explain ecological successions do we talk about the plants? It's primarily because based on what plant or what community of plant creatures are there, you have animals inhabiting that area. So when I'm saying something has changed into this plant form, you can understand the fact that associated with it, even the animals or whatever other organisms associated with it has had its succession also happening. Anyway, coming to this one over here, you will see that there is bare rock, there's lichens, small annual plants. What exactly is happening over here? So initially what is happening over here is you had rock, and this rock slowly starts getting affected by some climatic conditions. It can be wind, whatsoever. It gets acted on to these rocks. From there, the breakdowns happen. From the breakdown and chemical reactions, maybe there could be something that aids life, and here you slowly have smaller organisms. It's not like even first lichens came about. You would have smaller microscopic organisms, and from the smaller microscopic organisms, you have algae and fungi and everything. You have lichens, and as the lichens keep growing, what happens? The soil's composition is changed. you have more chemicals coming in. You have the lichen dying off after its life cycle, and then that carbon adds. This changes the soil and it aids the growth of small annual plants, etc. After that, again, this kind of change happens, and slowly you will see that. See, a lot of times students get misunderstood with the idea that it gets replaced. Over the time, when you have your perennial small annual plants or lichens, eventually what's going to happen is that small annual plants or lichens, a majority of them is going to get replaced by your perennial herbs, grasses, etc. But it doesn't mean that the others will get wiped out. You will still have lichens and small annual plants, but mostly you will have perennial herbs, grasses, etc. But as you go further and further into succession, what happens is, based on the kind of plants that are growing over there, those things can affect the climate, and the climate in turn affects or aids the plants that are growing over there. Which means that it's not, when I'm saying, okay, it gets replaced by something, it's primarily because through the different stages of succession, climatic conditions over there have changed, soil conditions over there have changed, to the point where now these smaller things, they don't find enough space or enough conditions to grow in a good manner. That is when they get wiped off completely. And again, understand, because they got wiped off from here doesn't mean that they don't exist elsewhere. We are just talking about the succession in one particular area. So ecological succession is the subsequent process by which communities get replaced or changed into one another over a period of time. And you can have two kinds of succession. There is something called as primary succession and secondary succession. Primary succession is from where the initial community and the initial parts over here, the first stages of any succession, are called as pioneer stages. Primary succession is where it takes place, or the succession takes place in an area where no community has existed previously. There was no community previous to it. Community means what? Group of different organisms. So, primary succession happens in an area where no community existed previously. That means here you will not have any kind of, you just had abiotic factors. You might have had individual organisms, but still they are not a community. They are not a community. This is very important. Some people think that primary succession means it has to always start with bare rock. Nothing like that. The idea is where no community existed previously. Community means what? Group of different organisms, plants, animals, anything. It should be varied. Okay, so even if you have a single organism, you cannot say that it was you can call it as something as part of primary succession, because single organism or single group of organism is just population and it is not a community. Okay. Now, moving forward, here you will see that secondary succession is the sequential development of biotic communities after the complete or partial destruction of the existing community. Which means what? You had something going on growing, one community replaced by another, and finally at one stage what happens is this gets destroyed in some manner. Okay, it can be cut down, it can be uprooted, it can be burnt, whatever happened, it got destroyed. Then what happens? This is destructed, and from this part again you will start your succession, and this is called as secondary succession. So let me ask you something. When, for example, in this stage, let's say, in this stage, these things got destroyed. Will you again have to start from this one? No. Why? Because when this gets destroyed over here, the climate, the soil has already changed over there to an extent where if this gets destroyed, maybe you start from the one that is previous to it. Or maybe the one previous to this, but not from the initial stages itself. Why? Because it will never go back to a time where it was just bare rock. It will never go back to the time where there was no community, because by the time this gets destroyed over there, the seeds, whatever previous community existed, there will be some parts of it left over there. So this is the reason why secondary succession is always relatively faster. It's relatively faster. Now, what happens when it comes to different kinds of ecological successions? You will see that when it comes to productivity means productivity is always determined based on the number of green plants, because they are the ones which are the primary producers. Okay, so now can you tell me what would happen to productivity when ecological succession happens? In the case of productivity will increase because you will have much more diverse organisms coming in. Diversity of organisms, again, obviously, what is happening initially, it was just lichens and bare rock and everything, but as we go further, as we have much more higher quantity of plants coming in, along with it more animals also come in, so diversity increases. Complexity of food webs. We haven't studied food webs yet, but keep that in mind. We'll come back to that question when that topic after we finish food webs. Now, since you've understood ecological succession, the next thing that we have to discuss are three major words which are going to be super important to you to solve certain questions from other areas. Okay, so I'll tell you what is the connection. But now, I told you succession is happening, and succession, we took the example of bare rock and it is turning into a forest. But understand the fact that it need not always be bare rock. There can be a water area, and that water area can turn into a forest. All of these things can happen. Any area on earth can, when you have several changes in that area, geographical changes, climatic changes, you can have succession happening in that area. Now, this is where two terms come as important, called as ecotone and ecocline. What exactly is ecotone? Ecotone, if you look at two ecosystems over here, you have a land ecosystem and an aquatic ecosystem. So, assume that there is some amount of succession that is happening between land and aquatic over here. Maybe the aquatic ecosystem is slowly shifting into a land ecosystem, or the land is slowly shifting into an aquatic ecosystem. Whatever is the condition, understand that when this kind of a shift is happening or succession is happening, there's going to be one zone, a clear demarcated zone, where you have both the features of land and water, which means you look at this area over here. There is water, there is land. It's all submerged and it's all mixed together. Do we know such areas that are normally any kind of marshland that is there? Any areas where your mangroves grow? All of these are those kind of areas. Now, here, what are the important things you've noticed? One is land, one is water. These are two diverse ecosystems. We are not taking two ecosystems on land itself. We are talking about two absolutely diverse ecosystems, so diverse that when they are intermixing, we can clearly see the zone in a good manner. Okay, so an ecotone is a zone of junction or transition area between the two biomes. So now, when you talk about ecotone, one of the primary things you have to understand over here is, it is two very diverse ecosystems. And in those two very diverse ecosystems, that zone, it is, and because it's two very diverse ecosystems, the zone is quite clear. So I can clearly say, okay, from here on, it is the land has moved on to a complete transition, or from here the water has moved on to a complete transition. I can clearly see a zone of transition of both of those areas, and that area experiences or expresses the different features of both. And because it expresses the different features of both, when I'm saying features, it means what? Land, water, whatever is the associated temperature, salinity, everything associated with it. This intermediate region, this ecotone or this zone which is having these different or it's at the transition of these different areas, it will be having its own set of new species or varied species that can exist in this zone of transition. For example, there will be animals that can exist in water. There will be animals that can exist in land. But then now you have created, or there is an area where land and water is mixing. So some species will, adapt and will evolve to form into, or will try to be into a situation where it can be existing in this intermediate zone. So in ecotone, you do see a higher degree of varied species, and this is called as edge effect. It refers to the changes in the population or community structures that occur at the boundary of two habitats. Boundary of two habitats is primarily where? This one. This is the boundary of this is the boundary of this. What is happening in the boundaries in between area? It is an ecotone. So you will see that this is one of the reasons why in areas like mangroves, you see a wider variety of birds coming in, you see a wider variety of plants coming in. All of those things are occurring because of the edge effect. An edge effect occurs at the zones of transition between your two very diverse communities or biomes. Now coming into a different term called as ecocline. Ecocline is actually something that it's a transition itself, but it's a transition between two very similar ecosystems. For example, here if you are having a grassland and here you are having a dry deciduous forest, what is going to happen over here? It is the zone of gradual and continuous change that is happening. From here it is changing into that, or vice versa, whatever it is. But the point is what? Here you are having a zone, but it's a very gradual thing. You're not able to clearly as an ecotone, you're not able to see like, okay, this is changed, or this is very different from the other one. Okay, you're seeing both species are there, it's quite similar. So a zone of gradual but continuous change from one ecosystem to another is called as ecocline. So ecocline will have no sharp boundary between the two in terms of species composition. It is going to be very gradual, and you will also see that as opposed to the other one, here there is no variety of species or anything. It's almost the very similar species that can exist in both of these conditions. So in an ecocline, the primary thing is you are having a transition between two very similarly placed ecosystems. Okay. Now suppose what if there was a desert over here? There was a desert and there was a dry deciduous forest. This intermediate area where the desert ends and that begins, that can be called as an ecotone because it's completely different. You do not see the clear zones, or you absolutely do not see desert population in your dry deciduous or in that intermediate area. Okay, so that is your ecocline, ecotone and edge effect. Now we move on to a little bit of higher concepts. So if until here you've understood things, you can say your level 2 is done. Now we move on to level 3, where we have a little bit more detailed environment concepts. And the first such environment concept that we're going to study is something called as niche or ecological niche. Okay. What is the function of a species? See, primarily every species' role is to hunt another species or eat something, breed. And this is the work of all of it. So now my question is, why do they need to do any work? This is their work. Why do they need to do any work? They need to do some work because otherwise, if they don't eat, if they don't breed, what's going to happen? Their species or their their life will be under threat because they cannot survive. So when it comes to niche or when it comes to their different jobs, if they don't do it, they will not exist. So this is quite understandable. Then comes the next point. Do each of them have a very specific job? Or is the job shared by all of them together? Or if you take a group of organisms, my question is, can similar species or can organisms all share one particular niche itself? Niche means work. Now, this is where you have to understand organisms cannot share that one particular work that is assigned to them. Why? Because if the work is to go and prey on a creature and that work is assigned to 5 different creatures and they all are going and preying on one, what is going to happen? The population of it is going to decline. Right? So when they and the other creatures, the 5 of them that's assigned, they'll be like, hey, we all are going behind this one itself. So I think it's time that they would start fighting amongst themselves. And this is going to lead to something called as competition. And this competition in turn will lead to your different similarly placed creatures killing other organisms. And this will put at threat a lot of creatures. So this is the reason why your work is not shared when it comes to your ecosystem. So the niche is the unique functional role and position of a species in the habitat or ecosystem. And in a habitat, no species can have the same niche. If they do have the same niche, they will compete for the same resource and ultimately one of them will get extinct. This is the reason why you do not have similarly placed niches, or you can say that the work or the functional role of an organism is quite unique. Moving up a little bit into it, you have this concept that we've studied even in smaller classes called as food chain. Now, I told you right now itself the functional role of an organism, and I explained it to you and I said the functional role is mostly going and eating another organism or preying onto something, etc. Why does that have to happen? Obviously, one organism preys on another because this one needs energy. Okay, if only this one gets energy, will it be able to do its niche? So, understand, its niche is to go and prey on something, and if it does that work only, it gets enough energy to again do the niche. This is a very cyclic thing. So, to maintain the niche or to do the niche of a species in its proper manner, it needs energy. And this energy is got by feeding on other animals. So the transfer of food energy from different species to another is called as food chain. So it's repeated eating, being eaten, in this manner. So you have plants which produce energy from the sun and nutrients, and then you have herbivores which will eat the plants. Then from the herbivores which eat the plants, and you have first level carnivores which will eat the herbivores, and so on and so forth. So this is a food chain, and understand the energy from a food chain always flows unidirectionally. Unidirection means only in one direction. Why? Why? Because if you look at it, you need plants will be the first criteria from where they have the energy, and it will always be flowing from one trophic level to another. What will happen if it went on to the other side? If there was one going on this side and the other one also eating, there would not be a balance of energy. Got it? So this is the reason why here energy flows to the trophic levels from producers to subsequent trophic levels, and it is unidirectional. Then comes the important point. When you have your grass, which is taken sunlight, produced food, and the grass is eaten by the grasshopper, and the grasshopper is eaten by the frog, and then the snake. Understand? Here in the grass is where all of the or most of the energy that is there in the sun can get captured and it can create food. Okay. Now, suppose the grass created 1000 joules of energy. Now, what is going to happen is the grass needs to function. It needs its own, it has its own activities. So, after all of these activities, what remains when a grasshopper eats it is only 10% of this 1000 joules, which means the grasshopper gets only 100 joules of energy. And from the grasshopper again the same function happens, and the frog gets only 10 joules of energy. Finally, when it comes to the snake gets only 1 joule of energy. That means at each trophic level there is a decrease in the energy available for the next trophic level. There's a decrease in the energy. So let me ask you, in this way, if I look at it, is what is the higher limit of the levels in a food chain? You can have only 5. 5 is, now let's have a look at this. Let's pictures. You have 1, 2, 3, 4. Here itself it's 1 joule. If there's some other creature over there, maybe an eagle, it will get 0.1 joule. And if there's something further, what is it going to get? It will be a much more higher level organism, but it will get a very minuscule level of energy, and this is not sufficient for its functioning. So you will see that the highest levels of trophic level possible is 5 to 6, not beyond that. If you have much more higher levels, what's going to happen is it defeats the purpose of food chain being in action, because the food will not give enough energy for a higher level organism to function. Okay. Now, the different types of food chain are grazing food chain and detritus food chain. Grazing food chain starts with producers, and detritus food chain starts with dead or organic matter. Okay. Now, coming into the concept of food web. Food web, again, understand that a food chain is the actual reality that might be happening in a habitat, in an ecosystem. A food web, on the other hand, is the potential pathways that could happen. Potential pathways that could happen primarily means that there is grass. The grass can be eaten by the mouse. The grass can be eaten by the grasshopper. The grass can be eaten by the rabbit. Okay. Now, how much or where or what part of this grass is eaten is all not determined. But the point is, this is a hypothetical representation of all the possible paths of energy flow. Okay, this is where you have to understand a food web might not be directly present in all of these ways. You cannot say, okay, that is not there, that is there. But the point is, it's the possibility of what all pathways is possible, or whatever food chains are possible over there. Food chains means what? The energy transfer that is possible. This is what we try to represent in a food web, which means that these food web is multiple interlinked food chains that make a food web. This is what is happening over here. If any of the intermediate food chains is removed, the succeeding links will be affected in a very bad manner. Okay, this is what is happening. So understand over here too, if you've understood these concepts, this question shouldn't be very difficult for you. A food chain illustrates the order in which a chain of organisms feed upon each other. Food chains are found within the populations of a species. A food chain illustrates the numbers of each organisms which are eaten by the others. The first one says it is in the order, which is a correct thing. Food chains are found within the populations of a species. It is not possible to find food chains within the population. Now you have to tell me in the comments why. Why is it not possible for food chains to be found within a population? It's a very simple thing. We've already discussed this. If you've understood niche and you've understood all of this, you would know the answer for it. So tell me, food chains are found within the population of a species. The statement is false. It cannot be the case. But the reason you have to let me know in the comments. A food chain illustrates the number of organisms, number of each organisms which are eaten by others. Does it illustrate? Does the number, do you get how many rabbits were eaten, how many grasshoppers were eaten from the food chain? No, you do not get that. So I can say there's only one correct statement, which is statement 1. Now we move into understanding. See, based on the different interactions that are there between organisms, you will see that you can have positive interactions and you can have negative interactions. Okay, so we are now going to learn what these positive and negative interactions are. See, a negative interaction, let's take the example of negative interactions first. Negative interactions are the ones in which when two species interact, at least one or at the most both of them are negatively affected by it. Okay, that means at least one of them or both of them will get negatively impacted. At least one or both are negatively impacted. So now let's start having a look. Some of the negative interactions that we have to look into is, the first one is something called as amensalism. Amensalism is the one in which you have two species. Okay, one species is negatively impacted, and for the other species there is no impact at all. Okay, one species is negatively impacted and the other species has no impact at all. Like, for example, a large tree shade, where what happens is you have a large tree and the tree is doing its job, it's taking water and air and everything, and it's growing. A small plant that happens to grow under the tree will easily start perishing because it will not get sunlight or it will not get proper nutrients because the tree is taking it. But is the tree purposefully trying to destroy the small plant? No. But what is the impact? The small plant is getting destroyed. Is the tree affected in any manner? The tree does not even know that there is a small plant over there. Which means what is happening? One species is negatively impacted, which is a small plant, and the tree has no impact at all. Then it comes to another form of interaction. It's called predation. What happens in predation is, one species is negatively impacted and the other species is positive over here. Which means what? Here you can see that predator. We would have heard the word in different contexts. Now understand, there is going to be a predator and a prey, which means that you have a species that will be going and preying on a creature. Obviously the prey is badly affected. The prey is getting killed. But the predator is getting food from it. The predator is positively affected. Because of its food, it's able to grow, it's getting energy, it's positively affected. So one is negative, the other one is positive. Then comes parasitism. And understand, in predation, what happens is the other organism gets killed. Okay, this one gets killed, it's harmed or inhibited. Okay. Now, in the case of another negative interaction, it's called as parasitism. In parasitism, what happens is an organism chooses one organism as the host. And the parasite starts living with the host. When I'm saying living with the host, the parasite is completely dependent on the host for its food, shelter, whatsoever. Which means if the host dies, the parasite will be affected, right? So understand, in the case of parasitism, it's different from predation because the other creature is not killed or anything. Okay, the host is not killed, but the host is badly affected because now think of tapeworm that occurs inside human intestine. Tapeworm is a parasite taking all the food from it. The human does not get any food. The human keeps consuming, but the human does not feel energetic. It's not having enough energy. So now the host is badly affected. The parasite is having a good day, but the host is inhibited, the host is harmed, but the host is not killed over here. Okay, in predation it becomes a bad thing because the other organism is killed off. It's completely destroyed. Here it's not completely destroyed in one go. In step by step, in very gradual stages, what happens is it is getting harmful for the species. And finally, competition, as we had discussed. Competition is something that is bad for both. Both organisms are adversely affected by this interaction. So, any kind of competition that exists for resources will come as a negative interaction. Now, coming into the different positive interactions, you have positive interactions like commensalism, mutualism, etc. Commensalism, mutualism, these are positive interactions where one species is positively impacted and the other one has no impact at all, or both the species are positively impacted. Okay, commensalism means for example, the sucker fish that gets attached to the shark. Shark is a large creature. The shark doesn't care who's following it or who's being with it. The sucker fish, on the other hand, will get some, after the shark takes a prey, some bits and pieces and everything that it will get. It'll eat it. It's not harming the shark in any way. The shark does not even know it is there. The shark is not impacted by its presence. But the sucker fish is having a very good day. Okay, so what happens over here? This is a commensalistic interaction. Mutualism is where there is an interaction between two species and both of them are positively affected or positively impacted. Both of them get something out of that relationship. So you have the sea anemone and the hermit crab. You have the interactions of coral reefs where both of them are affected in a good manner. So what happens is, for example, let's take the sea anemone and the hermit crab. When it comes to these different organisms, what happens is the anemone actually provides protection to the hermit crab and the hermit crab provides food and everything to the sea anemone, and it's a mutualistic interaction. So these are the different interactions possible. Now we move on to in level 3 itself. This is the highest highest difficulty that is there, which is your ecological pyramid. So if you've aced this area, then you are at the top of level 3 in my class, where you have reached to that difficult level when it comes to the static areas. So now let's go into ecological pyramid. When we have to discuss ecological pyramid, understand again, this is a representation. This is not something that is, set in hard and fast rule somewhere. It is a representation of the different trophic levels that are there in a certain area. So now you know what are trophic levels, producers, consumers, top consumers, etc. Now the point is you can represent different things. You can represent their numbers, you can represent their biomass, you can represent their energy. Based on all of this is where you have different structures, and the structures are called as pyramid because ideally what happens is you have different trophic levels, the producers, consumers. This, when it comes represented, you have it in a triangle form. But understand, the pyramid can be of different shapes. Can be upright, it can be inverted, it can be spindle. There are different possibilities. So let's have a look into each of this. So understand, this is just a representation. The length of each bar represents the total number of individuals or biomass or energy at each trophic level, which means that if I am telling you in a certain ecosystem there is one producer, 30 consumers and 100 top consumers. This will never be the case, but what will your pyramid look like? Top consumers come at the top level and it is having a much more larger number. Smaller consumers are 30 and producers 1. This is what it will look like. Understand? So they can ask you a very interesting question by giving you this and asking you what will be the shape of the pyramid. Okay, so if you know the area, know the different what can be there in that different area. And why did I tell you this will never be the case that there will be one producer 30? That's because when I'm saying top consumer, like for example eagles and a lot of birds, this is quite disproportionate. If there are 100 top consumers, you need to give food for all of them, right? They're just, if in the intermediate level there are only 30 of them, how will all of them have food? This is the reason why this is not possible. But if they ever give you a scenario like this and ask you to shape it, you have to look at each level, at each trophic level, how many species or how many numbers are possible. Now with that, let's go to the first pyramid, which is pyramid of numbers. In the pyramid of numbers, it represents the total number of individuals of different species at each trophic level. It can be upright or inverted. Let's have a look at this. Now this is the case of a normal grassland which is there. Producers are a lot in number. Based on that, you have producers, smaller ones, and as you go further you have primary carnivore, secondary carnivore, top carnivore. You have this entire thing and you can see that this is a correct upright shape. Then you have the next one where you have a pond like ecosystem, and in the pond also what is happening, you have different producers. You have that going in a manner which is in an upright condition. Now coming into another scenario, if I had to draw the pyramid of a tree. Okay, and what all are there in the tree? There is a tree, and in the tree there are few birds, maybe 10-12 birds, and then there is one eagle that comes to eat this. What will the shape look like? This one. Why? Because one tree, smaller bar, more number of herbivores, and then one carnivore. This is going to be a spindle shaped. In inverted, again, what is happening? If this is a tree, there is herbivores. Now those herbivores are what you say on the herbivores. If you have multiple parasites, that is going to be at a much higher level, and on those parasites, if you have further parasites, hyperparasites, you're going to have much more higher levels in this manner. So this is an inverted pyramid of numbers. Now again, when it comes to pyramid of biomass is actually trying to represent how much or at each trophic level you collect all the organisms which are occupying each trophic level and you are measuring their dry weight. Okay, that means the amount of biological matter that can be used in the next trophic level. Each trophic level has a certain mass of living material, and that is what is being generated, or that is something that will be going on in the next or that will be utilized by the next trophic level. So you are ideally measuring your different biomasses. So if you look at producers, you can have your grass, which can be up to a lot of biomass. You can go further. What is being represented over here, it's not the weight of these organisms, it's the biological content that is present in them that can be utilized by the next level which is there. Okay, so or that can be turned into something in the next level. So this is the reason why when it goes up, you will see these different biomass is basically the biological content that is there, and that can be used by the next trophic level. Moving forward, the last pyramid that you have is your pyramid of energy. And in your pyramid of energy, as I told you, the pyramid of numbers can be upright, inverted, spindle, etc. Even pyramid of biomass can be any of these, but the pyramid of energy will always be upright. Why? Because I just told you earlier, when you have any form, you have a unidirectional flow of energy. Unidirectional flow of energy. When you have unidirectional flow of energy and there's a decrease at each trophic level, there's a decrease of each 10, 10, 10, only the 10% gets into the next level, and so on. What is going to happen? You are going to have a situation where the representation will always be upright, because at no point will the energy of this stage be more than this. Only if it's more than this, you can have an inverted situation, right? That will never happen, and that is why pyramid of energy is always upright.